him and his father were in business in Henny.
Right.
Wheelwrights and carpenters and that sort of thing. And of course, at that time, in the 30s, farming was absolutely terrible. No, you know, nobody wanted the land or couldn't make any money or anything else.
Amazing, isn't it?
And he saw this job advertised, old Lady Oates up the hall, for an estate carpenter and a wheelwright, because all farms were wagons and tumbrels and horses and things, you know. So he applied and got it, and that's how we came to Gestingthorpe.
Right.
Down the Crescent in Gestingthorpe, 1948.
1940. You was actually born in the house?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure it was.
In 1948?
Yeah.
And then if we just ask you a bit about your family history, obviously your father lived here, and your grandfather lived here as well.
Yeah, I used to live next door to the pub.
Your grandfather?
Oh, the car park, yeah.
Oh, he
First
lived
house next
in which house next to the pub did he live? The one right next to the pub?
Yeah, on the car park.
On the car park.
Right, it's car park now.
And he lived there when you was a child, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, till I was about 14 years old, I suppose. That's when they pulled them houses down, when they moved into them bungalows up there.
In Gestingthorpe.
In Gestingthorpe, yeah.
In a cottage which was called Kemp's Cottage. The name was changed at a later date to White Cottage, but it is now back called Kemp's Cottage again. It's been to the original name.
Where is that?
On top of Hickson Hill.
Oh right, yeah, okay.
On the North End Road.
Yeah. And were you born at home?
Yes. Well, Mum lived with her parents. My gran and granddad moved there because Granddad went there to work for the Oates family, Captain Oates's people at the Gestingthorpe Hall. And so they lived in the cottage, and Dad was in the army at the time.
How many people did you deliver to in Gestingthorpe then?
Who the hell?
In them days, you reckon?
I don't know, because I didn't know one around the latter part.
You sent somebody else?
Arthur went, my brother.
Oh, did he? Yeah, I didn't know he helped you on the call round.
Yeah, him and Evelyn used to do it.
Oh.
I don't know how many they had to finish. So that, because we used to do that at Yeldham, Wickham, Twinsted, Sudbury, Acton, Waldenfield.
Who bought it off of you then? Brady bought it off you?
No, Moyes.
Who did?
Moyes.
Moyes bought it off you, did he?
Be able to do your earliest memories of Gestingthorpe.
I vaguely remember the Gussie's cottage in Pump Yard, the N1, catching light and burning down. I vaguely remember that, and I think I have a vague remembrance of having to go to the Nice family while it was on fire, but whether that's right or not, I think it is right. He was apparently drying off some mats, and he set fire to the house anyway, and it was burnt down, and that was a burnt out shelf until they pulled that Pump Yard down, wasn't
And that was an old cottage, wasn't it?
Well,
Tapped onto the edge, the end of the row. And did that take the rest of Pump Yard with it?
No,
or what?
that was just that one burnt down. The rest of them was still there, and my grandmother was still living in the end one. Lenny Martin was living in one of them as well.
And why
did
did
the others were empty?
Why did they demolish those then?
Why did they demolish them? I don't really know, really. I think the Cooks sold them off, and the Dixies demolished them and rebuilt them, didn't they?
Right.
And they were much pleasanter looking houses then than what they are now. Things I remember. I do remember we used to go to Lenny Martin's and have ginger biscuits occasionally when us three children were really young, and I vaguely remember the old lady living next door to us as well. Apparently my mother said she always thought the house was haunted, but the cottage was 2 then, it's now 1. And then after that, when I was very young, we moved to the Foundry House. And
on the corner?
On the corner,
yeah.
And I remember then, Mother worked at the fruit farm, Tuckland's fruit farm, picking apples, and I remember going on the back of her bike with Tina Sanford and Tina Sanford's mum, and going down to the orchard. And
Castle Headingham, right?
In the pub, in the Voice and Son.
Oh, were you? Born in the pub.
And when I was 3 months old, my father went to Australia to look for gold.
Did he? Wow.
And my mother came back to live in Gestingthorpe. And then the war broke out. And my dad went in the army, had to go in the war then, so.
Yeah. And where were you living then? Were you still living in Castle Hedingham then?
No, came back to live in Gestingthorpe.
Right.
In the moat.
In the moat? Wow.
The house was burnt down there and gone.
Ah, yes. Well, it was one of the cottages, was it?
They're the ones what would have faced the road.
Yeah.
Everything was that house sideways to the road. There was a house at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
To live at the lodge, did he not?
Cecil and Arthur used to work for Dad.
Arthur Nears was the one.
Yeah, and because so did he knew Cookie as well. No Arms Cookie worked for Grandad, and he got one of his arms cut off because he'd already had one cut off as a child, and then he had his other arm cut off in Dad's chaff cutter, and that wasn't long after that Grandad got his arm cut off in the same machine.
Right, and you called him No Arms.
Yeah, No Arms Cookie.
Because
yeah,
he's now called Hooky, which is a bit more polite, but No Arms is fine.
Him and Grandad, Grandad used to think a lot of him. He learnt him how to drive the traction engines, and he used to work. Dad said when they were working, he said you would never know they'd lost arms, but they were playing cards in a house one day with another one with one arm. And so there were three on the sat around the table, and they'd only got one good arm between, two good arms between the three of them. They were playing cards. I think Grandad always used to win.
I remember starting school, and I think I started in the September, and there was four. This was Bournemouth School, and not the old Bournemouth School. This was the new Bournemouth School. I think my sister actually went to the old Bournemouth School and the new Bournemouth School, but it was the new Bournemouth School that I went to. And there was four of us started on that day. One was Ian Theobald, who came from Bournemouth. One was Timmy Gifford, who came from Henny. And the other fellow, I think his name was Colin Hay, but I don't know where he came from. And and we four started in September. And then I think they must have had two intakes. We were one, and then a lot more people came after Christmas. I think.
Right.
Because we were the older ones in that year.
Right.
So, and we used to go on an old bus. A real grumpy old bus driver who wore a bus driver's cap.
Oh yeah.
And it was one of them long nose things what you see on the St Trinian's film. No long nose.
Oh right, yes.
Old long nose Bedford or something.
Yeah.
And we used to have to go all the way around Pawley, and we used to go up the hill into Pawley from the bottom of Seven Falls Hill, and the old bus could hardly get up to the top. You know, just crawl up there. But it was a long old way round. We had to take a long way round to get to Bournemouth School. And my first teacher at Bournemouth School, name was Mrs. Moody, her name was. And Basil Slaughter was the headmaster. And there were 3 classes, so I don't know how many children. There were only been about 60 children there, I suppose.
Right.
Back then.
I can remember when I could have only been about 4 or 5, was coming right on the back of a horse coming from Wickham. I'm sure it was my Uncle Cecil leading the horse, and we came across the fields. And I was sitting on the back of it to take it to the nicest to be shoed. And I remember being down there while they were shoeing the cart horse. But I can also remember Dad coming down as well in the car, and he wanted to give me a lift back, and I said no, I wanted to go back on the horse. But when I got home, I wished I hadn't, because my legs were just killing. Where they'd been so wide on this big cart horse, I couldn't. I couldn't stand up for about 3 days after.
And you said...
When I went to school, we had Miss Elliot come and lived in the moat when I was, I think my older sister was about 13 then, and she was 4 years older than me. You know the moat where the knots live?
Yeah.
She came from Gosfield. She was a parson's daughter, and she was very keen on music and institutes and everything. And she used to come to the school and get us interested in raffia work and things like that. And she used to take us singing classes. We used to go. And she was very keen on the institute. And she could when they couldn't get anyone, she played the organ in church. She used to take us for choir practice. Because when we hadn't got a parson's wife, there was Mr. Green, and he hadn't got, he wasn't married, so there was no vicar's wife. And she sort of did a few things like that,
Yeah.
World. And then if anybody went to London, it was a big event.
Yeah.
The whole village would hear about it. So I've been to London. Nobody ever went there. It was like.
And what about?
And I remember. I'll tell you one thing. I do remember. I remember people's cars as well.
Right.
Because when people had a car, not everybody had cars then, but when people had cars, they had them for a long while, and you can even remember what makes they had.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I remember Charlie Chatters always. He lived in Sudbury Road. He used to park his car near the pond on the crossroads, and that was a Morris or an Austin 1100, and I remember that always been there. And I remember I was with my friend Mark one day, and we were playing knocking around there, and I think he threw a stone at me, or I might have thrown a stone at him, and that smashed the front windscreen. Because he obviously never found out who did it.
You scarpered,
You scarpered pretty quick. But and I remember him having that. I remember Cyril Reeve, who lived next door to us, he had an Austin Allegro, I think. He always drove Austins, and he used to park his car in a little shed in the Pound Farm. His father had a couple of Vauxhall Victors. And he used to park. There used to be a asbestos garage on the Pound Farm, and he took that over and he used to park it in there. So it's funny that you remember people's cars from all the way back there. There was Nurse Brown, who lived in one of the bungalows. She had a black Morris Minor, like all nurses had.
The old dummy aerodrome up near what I call Three-Cornered Wood. Well, I was telling you about that bomb dropped on that water pipe.
Yeah.
Well, that field, there was one of the lights on there. You know the lantern, what they call the lantern?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, well, the wire from that dummy drone came down that track. I went across the road. There's the lantern. And I went down that hedge. I suppose that's underground in the road. And I went down the hedge between two of Towson's fields, and there was a pipe across the brook, and the wire went through that to the lights.
Oh, to one of the lights that was on that field?
On that field, yeah. Because they dropped one bomb on that pipe and one on that field.
Yeah.
So and then they dropped some more up round by the Lays, didn't they, across the fruit farm?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, do they?
That's funny, I was left a cart.
Yeah, old clay. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember trying to get some there, because if I was doing a bit of ditch or something and that went for a good bark, they'd put some of that in the bottom. But you couldn't get it on the spade, you couldn't get it off.
Heavy stuff.
No, that's why we don't use spades to lift up, we use cuttles still.
Oh yeah.
Things like that. That's right. Because you can't pick it up with a spade, can you?
No.
can you remember of the Crescent and who lived down at the Crescent and the barracks and new houses, new cottages down your way when you were?
Well, down the barracks there was a bloke called Malcolm Mead. He must have been at school when I was there. He must have been another one of the school friends, but they moved away when I was, I don't know, about 8, 9 years old, I reckon. Andy Wiseman and David Wiseman.
Oh, they were there, were they?
Yeah, they're all down the barracks. Pearly Camp and Angie Camp.
Yeah. Chicken was there as well, was he?
Yeah, Billy Reynolds.
And Billy Reynolds. Chicken was in one end one, Billy Reynolds in the other end one.
Yeah.
And you tell me that Billy Reynolds and them, they used to keep some pigs down there somewhere, didn't they, or his father?
Yeah, on the bend between the Crescent and the barracks.
Oh, and
anyone to believe this. This is a... No, I don't tell stories because I ain't got time to tell stories. I only tell truth. I was supposed to never tell. I was working for Balfour Beatty at the time. For some reason or other, I don't know why I had Pat's bike, but I had Pat's bike at this particular time. And we used to come home from work about 6, 7 o'clock. Then I always had a drink in the pub, always.
the line.
The line. That was the headquarters where we came back to, the old wagons. I was particular night. I never had too many. I know when I'm drunk, when I ain't drunk. I never had enough to be drunk. We used to have a couple of Guinness perhaps, that's all I had. And that was a very blowy, one of them nights when you can see the clouds flashing over the moon. And I came down towards the church, which I've been by hundreds of times, thousands of times, been in it, because I love the churchyards. I've got something about burning churchyards and being with the people in there who are in there. And I love anything like that. And then I was on this bike and I'm coming out, I got by where Mrs. Colleges, what do they call them, people colleges there? Church colleges. Church colleges. I was coming by there, I passed by. And I looked, the lich gates, I could see the lich gates were closed, which they always were closed. And I see what I thought was two nuns, and I couldn't believe it. Because I'd never seen anything like that before in all my life. And I looked and I thought, God hell, what the hell is that? And they came right through the gates. God stroked me dead down. Came right through the gates. So they were open, they just came through, they floated through. Well, did my bloody feet go on them pedals? I was gone. And I got home, and I know what these are the words she said. She said, I was what? She said, so you seen a ghost? I was like, bloody well, mate. I never said more about it then. I might have said, went on and told the story I've just told you. But this was many, many weeks and maybe months, maybe even years went by. And we was out ferreting one Saturday, one Sunday morning, which we always went on Saturday mornings. And for some reason or other, I must have told the story I've just told you. Dick said, I ain't bloody nuns. No brides. Do brides. So do you know, you old twit? Because I do, he said. He said, no, that's what I've been seen before. Years and donkey's years before you ever came to the village. They've been seen before. That's a story. Now whether we believe in ghosts or whether we believe in things like that, That is a true and honest true story. What I see, I see. I know I see it. That frightened me at the time. That never frightened me now. But I shall wait and see where they went.
Where Les's bungalow was, he was the local chimney sweep, the village chimney sweep lived there. Billy Brown, I think his name was. I know when my dad and Bill Montague built the bungalow, they had one heck of a job with it. There's so many seniors they couldn't get a foot in it, so they had to dig so far down to get a all cinders where he'd been carting home, you know. So I went off down to Sudbury. I mean, there weren't many places, you know, what I knew of. And I went to Lucas, or CAV as it was then. And blow me, the bloke I met up with was the foreman there. He was the chap I played cricket with at Sudbury, Peter Clayton. And they said, I'm afraid you'll have to work nights for a while anyways, we have got nothing else, you know. And I went in, I said, well, I'll try it. Have a go, try night work. I'd never done anything like that before, you know. And I didn't mind it. But I didn't like the place at all really when I first went there. I thought, if I stick this for a month, I'll do well, I reckon. And about 29 years later, I took redundancy. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I don't know how old I was. My father had the first television that was ever in Gestingthorpe, I reckon. He had a little auxiliary engine outside.
Did he?
Yeah. And the kids used to come, they never even used to go home. They used to come straight down the road, straight and out, and sit there and watch television. That was tea time. The Catterwells, they both used to come, John and Margaret.
Where did they live, Arthur?
They lived in the area house, a little further up from us.
Yeah. I don't remember them, you see, I don't. No, I can't remember them. Don't know when they were that way. Them are airy houses. I can remember who lived in them all. Like there was Horace and Ron lived in the first one, didn't they?
Yeah.
Then Russell Meekins lived in the next one, next to him, didn't he?
Did they?
Hubert and lived in the next one.
Yeah.
Then Mrs. Pratt lived in the next one.
That's right, yeah, beside him.
Then Johnny Radley lived in the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then that other one, there were several people come in and out of there, weren't there?
I don't know.
There were Mick and Lynn lived in there for a bit, didn't they? Next one along.
Yeah, they did live in there.
And then the Claydens lived in the one on the end.
That's right.
And they were the only people I ever knew lived in them. So they must have gone before that.
Oh.
Helpful baby?
No, Whitlocks.
Whitlocks, sorry, Whitlocks.
Whitlocks, right, yeah.
I didn't know you was at Whitlocks.
Yeah, I went to Whitlocks, yeah.
Who was at Whitlocks and Gestingthorpe when you was at
Oh, Frankie Nice, Walter, Alan Fox Ward, who else was there in? There was more than that, a lot more. Because the bus used to come through Gestingthorpe, pick it up from Sudbury to Bournemouth to Gestingthorpe every day. But I didn't actually go into the factory part of it. I went into the as a service engineer, didn't I? Well, if you had something connected with engineering them days, providing your head was screwed on right, you could go anywhere as an engineer. They didn't matter what sort of engineer you was until you went to do the job. You couldn't do it, then they knew what sort of engineer you was. But that's the sort of thing, you know, they'd done. I went there as a service engineer, then I used to travel doing the new, the diggers, they make the diggers there on old Fords. The old Ford units came to Germany, they built the diggers on them, and they went out all over the world, and most of them went to Schaefer in Germany, and they exported them, and a lot of them went on the Isle of Wight. And then they went different places, and I just go around and service them. And then
was that putting up the pylons or servicing them?
Yeah, I was working actually on these pylons just down the bottom of the field here.
Yeah.
I dug most of those, brilliant. Didn't know I was ever going to come and live there.
Yeah.
I've done that. I've done them. Then I went out to Trinidad and I packed in and I went in the building trade, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
Soon after that. It's all in a small amount of years. I weren't long periods of time on that. And then I went into the building trade with something like, I don't know, I suppose it's something I thought I'd do that tied up with me to play football, because I couldn't play football when I was with them because I had to work Saturdays. I was on houseless books at the time and they were crazy me to play for them. But I did play for them on one Wednesday in the Brotherhood Cup competition I played against them. I come on, Hartman scored a goal on the halfway line, I only just got on the pitch. I sent me cards, didn't know playing, I never ever went, did I? But anyhow, I got into the building trade and never spent most of my life.
Yeah.
From there.
Yeah.
So just
and you got a motorbike in your front garden one night as well, didn't you?
One Christmas, one lunchtime.
Christmas
It was
Eve, wasn't it?
Tom Elston. He was you was plucking the blinking goose, weren't you, Dad?
Yeah.
There was all this goose fluff and God knows what, and then there's a sudden bang on our doorstep.
Yeah.
And there's Tom Elston who'd come from the pub, and he'd swerved across the road somehow, and he ended up
landed on our doorstep.
He was all right though,
Was he
wasn't he?
okay? What about his bike?
Can't
He
be
right, he got up on the bike and rode away again, didn't he?
I think he did.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let us get the police because he'd been drinking.
Gardener had it. She didn't pay her tithe law taxes, and Grandad and Dad were down there thrashing her stacks, and the bailiffs turned up to take her machinery. And so Dad and Grandad pulled the thrashing machine in front of the barn doors to stop the bailiffs taking her stuff. And there was a big do about it. I went to Hedingham Court and Braintree Court, and that was a real big thing. But they took the wheels off the thrashing machine and took them back to Brick Wall. But I can remember Cecil Nears, who worked for Dad, saying to me one day, "You don't get arrested like your dad and your granddad." And I didn't take that much notice of it then. I was only 10. But then I knew when I found out later, he was talking about this thing at the tithe. But,
and that was Cecil, wasn't it, who used to live at...
yeah.
He used to live at the lodge, did he not?
Cecil and Arthur used to work for Dad.
Arthur Nears was the one.
Yeah, and because...
Did you ever remember Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I spoke to him in Gestingthorpe when he was Prime Minister of this country, all them years ago. He used to, his secretary was Mr. Richardson, who lived down at Ladden, down the road. And one Sunday dinner time, we were having lunch or had lunch or what, we look out the window and a nan stood beside me, and I say, "Well, Harold Wilson's standing there." She went, "Don't you start again, mate, Harold Wilson." I said, "Well, that is." And Mr. Richardson was with him. Well, Bernie's private secretary, he'd obviously came over for the day or the weekend and have a nice quiet weekend. And he was looking over our fence and looking at guinea fowl. And Mr. Richardson was telling him, we said, "What are these things?" He still didn't introduce me to the Prime Minister and say, this is our Prime Minister. He probably assumed I knew, because I knew everything else, so he probably thought I knew it was the Prime Minister. But that was Harold Wilson, and his wife was there at the same time, yeah. And I met them like there and there. And when I went and told Nan, don't you tell me, didn't she? Oh dear. But it was Harold Wilson.